Hello, hello, hello.
And welcome to the Hildebrand Law Firm topic for today.
I'm Kirsten Hildebrand.
And I'm Matt Kaplan.
And today we get to talk about marriage.
Wonderful.
So many of us do not fully comprehend or understand the legal significance of marriage and how that interacts with estate planning or non-estate planning.
Well, to be fair, Kirsten, most men don't appreciate the emotional commitment of marriage either.
That's true enough. You
Not
learn as
me.
you go.
Not
right?
me, but a lot of other guys.
Well, how many years are you married?
4.
4.
How about you?
Congratulations. I'm at 30. So
I'll get there.
Yes, you will. And it's fun. It gets better all the time, I promise you.
Certainly does.
So one of the things that's really interesting that comes up frequently now is that there is this whole group of people that really do not get married. The marriage rate is going down. And that doesn't seem like that should be either here or there. But in fact, it is enormous because the law recognizes legal relationships. So it recognizes the marriage certificate, whether it be same-sex marriage or traditional marriage. The law also, at least in certain counties in Wisconsin, recognizes what's called a domestic partnership. But that is also a legal relationship. If you do not have a legal relationship, then there really is no way that you have any rights under the probate laws, under the intestacy laws that would apply if there is no estate planning in place. So of course I have a horror story, right? So one, and actually I have several. There was a woman who was living with her partner, and they did not have a legal relationship, and they were living together for 30 years. Well, what she did not know is that, number one, he would fall over quite suddenly with a heart attack. And number two, that she was not on the house. She did not have her name on any of the bank accounts. There was no joint ownership of anything whatsoever. Of course, there were children by a prior marriage of his. And so when they were at the funeral, the children, who never liked her, served her with a 5-day notice. Now, what is a 5-day notice? What that is in Wisconsin, it is a basic understanding that you are a tenant in the house that their father owned, and you have 5 days to get out. And it was served on her by the process server, and she brought it to me and she said, "What are my legal rights?" And effectively, I had to say to her, "You have very few legal rights." And we were able to finagle a little bit under the tenancy laws. But as far as the intestacy laws, she was set to inherit 0 at that point in time. So that is really significant. And so I think the message, Matt, and I could say, oh, well, that only happened to those that couple because they were in their 60s and they really should have gotten married. But we have a probate right now in our office where she's 35 and he was 32, and he died of a heart attack very suddenly at his workplace, and they were not married for 12 years. And the sister of the guy who passed away never liked this woman, and this sister is going after her with a ferocity that you would not believe. So it can happen in any way, shape, or form. Is my recommendation that you get married? Well, from a purely legal perspective, if you want maximum protection for yourself, the answer is yes.
Yeah, Judge Judy always says, if you play house, this is what's going to happen. Okay? You got to play house. You got to go all the way. That's what Judge Judy always says. And really it is. It's the case. It's if you want to live together, especially if you want to purchase a home, share items, share a life together, from a legal perspective, it's probably a good idea to get married. The amount of clients, especially more so recently, it's kind of interesting. I'm getting a lot of clients coming here. Oh, we've been happily unmarried for 30 years. We've been,
Interesting.
yeah, which is kind of interesting, but yet they share a house together. Yet, they have separate bank accounts. They have separate everything, but they just share a life. And, I think that's wonderful that they share a life together. They have, a good idea of what's going to happen. But the moment something happens to one of them, the other one's not entitled to anything.
Unless they do their estate planning.
Right.
And so the benefit to doing the estate planning is that then they can override the intestacy laws that would have everything go back to their blood family, to put it simply. And so that's where that really comes into play.
Yeah, and what would have cleared up that whole situation that you talked about? Very simple. It's one paragraph I add inside the trust called a life estate, and all it says is that throughout the life, or whatever, however long of term you want, if one of us passes away, the other one can stay here as long as they need to. And then this way, because that home is going to be owned by your trust, that's the language in the trust. Kids can't come in and kick you out.
That's exactly right. We have done many trusts for unmarried people where the asset goes into the trust and the trustees end up being the two unmarried people, and it flows beautifully. And not only necessarily people who are acting in, say, a partnership relationship, but say an aunt and her nephew, or two sisters, or two brothers. So this can apply to any unmarried situation where there's been a conjoining of assets and there is really no good legal way to protect the other person except through the estate plan.
And a big thing with my generation that I've been seeing a lot more recently, plutonic relationships of people living together just because housing is so darn expensive. And so we've seen an influx of plutonic relationships that end up growing into these relationships where they tend to share assets, they share pets, they tend to just share their lives together. And so it's happening. You got to make sure that you're protected, and
That's
it's
exactly
you
right.
can be protected very easily with some very simple estate planning.
So now let's talk about what happens in terms of protecting assets when you are married. And the one thing that we are really adamant about at Hildebrand Law Firm is not just looking at one spouse, because oftentimes there'll be a triggering event. My husband was just diagnosed with dementia. My wife has major heart issues. There's been a cancer diagnosis. And they come in to do the estate planning, but we always make sure that we look at the entire picture. Not only this spouse who might predictably be set to go on to the next world sooner than the other one, but then also what happens, Matt, after that person passes away and then the second spouse starts to decline. Is there anything that we can do to protect the assets of the spouse?
For sure. And, we tell a lot of horror stories. Let me tell you a success story.
Oh, good. Okay.
So I had a success story come in. We do a lot of Medicaid and Medicaid applications here. And we had a success story somewhat recently where there was a couple, gentleman was, he was doing totally fine. His wife was in a nursing home. They had an estate plan in place. They had gotten it done many, many years ago. Everything was all set. Wife was in a nursing home. She was on Medicaid. They had all their assets in a trust protecting it. So they weren't available assets for Medicaid purposes. Husband was doing just great. Husband's the one who died.
Wow.
The husband outside of the home. That's called the community spouse. Husband ends up dying. Wife, who's been on Medicaid now for quite a while, they didn't have any planning in place. What would happen to all of husband's stuff?
It would all go to the wife, and then that would kick her off the Medicaid benefits.
Exactly. Because in order to stay on Medicaid benefits, if you're in the institution, if you're in the nursing home, you can only have $2,000 to your name in order to stay in there, in order to stay on Medicaid benefits. So what happened was, though, everything was in the trust. Because everything stayed in the irrevocable trust, nothing effectively changed for the wife. It's not like it went to her and then went right out, which is what would happen if there was no estate planning in place. It would go right to her. Medicaid would see, oh, that $2,000 now raised to $500,000, and then okay, Now that you have all this money, why are we paying for your care? You can clearly afford it. But in our success story, everything stayed in that irrevocable trust. Nothing effectively changed. She continued on her Medicaid benefits, and then as of today, she's still doing great, still in a home. She's got a little bit of memory loss issues, but she's doing great, and all of her assets are protected for her children and her grandchildren, and nothing effectively changed from her husband passing away.
And that's what you get when you get in front of these issues and you're proactive with planning for the future. And that's where Hildebrand Law Firm comes in, is we did all of that planning and it worked beautifully under unforeseen circumstances. And I think one thing we've noticed over the course of all of these years is that it is very difficult to predict what is actually going to happen. And so that's why we are so committed to protecting your today and your tomorrow. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next time.